Hello, welcome to Podfic Galore. I'm your horrible online reader, Goldskythe. I read out loud fanfictions for you busy bees, free of charge and no strings attached. Today I will continue reading the Silmarillion fic by Aeolian Sands from Archive of Our Own called The Rescue Party, Chapter 20. I hope you can at least try to enjoy my voice, and I will try my best for you with the equipment available to me. On with the show! The Rescue Party by Aeolian Sands, Chapter 20. Uninvited Guests. Vaire's handmaiden knew that this would be her masterpiece. Over the past month, her sisters had bragged and bragged about their new tapestries. Riste with her monstrous eel impaled by an elven sword, electricity radiating off its back in blue ribbons of thread. Ninqueven with the explosion on the beach, oranges, reds, and yellows combining to create the impression of a living fire. Thaurame with her so appropriately titled Escape from Mandos. Yet those works paled in comparison to this one. This tapestry would be her great work. In one corner, a great impact crater was depicted in its birth, a geyser of rock erupting from the ground. At the crater's center, one could make out in silver thread the folded wings of Eonwe as he drove Sauron into the earth. Above them, an eagle, spun in golden brown threads, was wheeling at the sight of displaced boulders taken to the sky. An elf with a bow and a curved sword was seen running towards the battling Ainur. In the opposite corner, Glorfindel was running for his life, a freed Fëanor sprinting after him, arms raised in demand of a sword. In the foreground, Ecthelion in his gleaming armor was depicted throwing a flute, the instrument tumbling through the air on a collision path for Fëanor's head. Near the center, an elfling was running for King Turgon, who stood right in the middle of the tapestry, back to the viewer, watching stunned as his world fell apart. All the other figures appeared to revolve around the king, planets in a mad orbit around a disbelieving sun. Fëanor did not remember the flute hitting his head. He did remember demanding that the rebellious half of Vanya give him the sword. Fëanor had needed that sword. Sauron would face justice for the torment of his eldest child and for fostering the armies of Morgoth. However, the first thing to greet Fëanor's eyes was the opposite of justice. He awoke to see the bars of a dank, damp cell with walls hewn of rock. These would have been understandable from a twisted, naive sort of view, considering the kinslaying and Elenve, had there not been a figure with dark golden hair laying in the cell next to him. Despicable! Who was Turgon to treat Sauron the Cruel akin to himself? They were most definitely not in the same category. However, Fëanor knew his way around iron bars. It would be a simple matter to dislodge one and throw it at the monster's head with enough force to cave in his skull. Sure, the bastard would likely just heal and shapeshift. Wait a second. What foul game is he playing now? Turgon was an idiot, but he wasn't this particular brand of idiot. He should know better than to attempt to restrain a Maya with a few flimsy bars. Even more perplexing a question was, why would Sauron go along with it? Was this another game to him? Sauron, he said, I see that you have been defeated. Why don't you run away as whatever foul rodent suits thee best? Sauron did not move from where he lay on his side with his back to Fëanor. He didn't so much as flinch. All right, fine, Fëanor mused. It was better when Sauron was quiet anyway. The Noldo walked to the bars and looked up to where the vertically oriented ones were slotted into small circular cuts into the granite above. He put both hands on one and gave it a good shake. The bar rattled. He tried twisting it and was delighted to see how it spun in place. Bending it would prove a bit difficult, however. Don't try it. Fëanor looked up to see Eonwe walking into the cellar. He was so tall that his head was grazing the ceiling. Fëanor studied his face, noting the few cuts and scrapes appeared to be almost healed. However, the wings he normally loved were completely missing. Not that they would fit in this cave-like room anyway. Try what? You know what I mean. I wasn't about to try anything. Ianwe narrowed his brilliant blue eyes at Fëanor. The former High King crossed his arms. I wasn't. I haven't yet figured out how to get past the bars. You can breathe, firstborn. I haven't come for you, Ianwe replied, reaching into his robes to withdraw a metal key. He approached Sauron's cell. Fëanor had a violent flashback involving thunderstorms and craters. This was way too small of a space for a round two. Wait! But the herald was already opening the cell door. Have you come to mock? A familiar voice replied, but it had lost its confidence, the golden tones sounding washed out by exhaustion. I have come to take you home, Ianwe replied, kneeling down when Umayyah still did not move. If you take me home, you will kill me. Melkor will not forgive failure, and not even the location of Gondolin could appease him, Sauron said. Ianwe reached out and touched his shoulder. To Fëanor's great surprise, Sauron did not attempt to get away. Something was not right. That is not your home, Ianwe countered. So the void then? No. Your home is in the west. Sauron humphed. Do you really want me in Valmar? No. But I refuse to give you to Melkor, and I will not inflict your presence on Turukano. He has another problem. Ianwe tilted his head back to indicate that Fëanor was the aforementioned problem. Fëanor heavily disagreed. He was an asset, not a problem. So stand up, or I can drag you up the stairs if you prefer. Reluctantly, Sauron got to his feet. Fëanor watched awestruck as the Umayyah allowed Ianwe to chain his arms behind his back and his ankles together. You sure have given up easily, he taunted. Sauron turned to stare at him in the eyes, fire flickering in his golden ones. Yet he said nothing. Ianwe explained. In our fight, I bound Mairon to this form and took from him his powers. This piqued Fëanor's interest immediately. You can take the powers of one of the Ainur? How? Ianwe did not answer. Instead, he put a cloth sack over Sauron's head and pushed him out the door. Turgon sat at the head of the council table fighting a throbbing headache. The discussion on what to do with Fëanor was long and indecisive, with general opinions ranging from Salgan's desire to throw him off Karak-Dur to Rogg's offer of adoption. They were both immediately vetoed. The former because kinslaying a kinslayer did not bode well in terms of accumulating favorable doom, and the latter because Rogg was not only young enough to be Fëanor's son, but also because the House of Hammer of Wrath did not need any more passionate personalities. However, no one else wanted to take Fëanor under their banner. Maeglin, his beloved nephew, had quietly suggested simply leaving Fëanor in the cell, but Turgon knew that his escape was inevitable. If Fëanor could escape from Mandos, then he could escape from the old wine cellar. Rogg might just get his wish, or at least a version of it after all. We could make him Lord of the House of the Pillar of Snow. Benlot deserves to focus on one house only. It will give Fëanor a stake in the safety and well-being of Gondolin, Duilin proposed. Manwë, no. He could not suffer to have Fëanor added to the Council of Lords. It would be like shooting an arrow through one's foot and then cutting the said foot off with an axe. I propose having him fix that massive crater in the plains, Duilin said from where he sat, head resting on his upright hand. No, let Benegolod interrogate him and write a new book. Should keep the esteemed lore master busy for a while, Glorfindel offered. Turgon stood, knowing that if he didn't stop them now, the ideas would get progressively more creative and less useful. The lords went quiet to hear their king speak. Elma told us two facts. That the elf was indeed Fëanor returned, and that he was to stay here in Beleriand. Thus the burden of his fate falls to us. He deserves death, yet death could not hold him. I doubt that the wine cellar could do better when even our Lord of the Golden Flower managed to escape. He eyed Glorfindel, remembering that particular episode. Glorfindel simply smiled and chuckled at the memory. Furthermore, Turgon continued, we cannot let Fëanor outside the gates. Lord Rog has already offered to take him into the House of the Hammer of Wrath. Well, I fear that to be an unwise combination. Turgon took a deep breath. I also believe the mines and smithies to be safer places to keep him than the city proper. Therefore, Rog, my uncle will be your responsibility. You are to call me or Councillor Maeglin at once if he dares to try anything. Treason, especially, will not be tolerated. Rog nodded, the faded scars across his mouth breaking as he smiled. It would be my pleasure, he answered in his rough Sindarin accent. Long has the hammer welcomed the refugees of Angband. They are who refuse to die because they have a bone to pick with the enemy. I've heard your uncle's history. An ex-Noldor king who faced Gothmog the demon and fled Mandos to fight again. He will fit in well with my people. Turgon was slightly worried about Fëanor fitting too well, but he said nothing and accepted it. Rog was the only full-blooded Sindar on the Council of Lords, and most of Rog's people were Sindar as well. It would be best to keep Fëanor with them and apart from the main Noldor host. Plus, hopefully Fëanor would be distracted enough by gems and mithril to keep any ill-conceived escape plans from seeing the light of day. Maeglin, he addressed his nephew, when you visit the mines, please check that my uncle is behaving. Maeglin nodded from his seat to the king's right side. Good. Turgon didn't trust himself with such a task, not after the Helgarakse. With that matter decided, this council is dismissed. May Varda bless you all, he closed, sitting down to watch the lords of the 12 houses of Gondolin make their way out of the great hall. Ecthelion and Glorfindel were last, the former muttering something about a dented flute. He turned to Maeglin. Get some rest, my nephew. You will need it in the coming days. Let me know if you find Idril too. It is unlike her not to show. Turgon looked at the empty chair on his left. Oh, just what was his daughter up to now? Maeglin bowed politely and turned to leave, following in the footsteps of the others. When the great doors closed behind him, Turgon sighed and massaged his temples. Fëanor back from the dead. My scheming uncle is alive and in my city. Surely this is a sign of the end of the world. And 2 Ainu fighting on my doorstep. Why now? Why me? Ulma, weren't we supposed to be a sanctuary? In due time, the king looked up, realizing in surprise that Engelmoth was still leaning against one of the pillars, his sapphire-blue robes catching some of the sunlight that was streaming through the high windows. The Lord of the Heavenly Arch looked deep in thought. The king sighed, walking from his seat to stand next to him. You are looking rather forlorn for one who brought down Sauron of Angband. Engelmoth uncrossed his arms. That was Eonwe. It was you who turned the tide. How could you have aimed an arrow through that dust cloud is beyond me. I promise we will have a proper celebration soon. Engelmoth chuckled. I might attend, if there's good wine. Turgon looked up at the sun glistening behind the stained glass windows. You were thinking of Fëanor? Engelmoth didn't have to tell him that he guessed right. He just shrugged his shoulders. It is different for you. You only ever saw one side of him. For you he was always the distant, wrathful uncle who threatened your father and burned the ships. But this isn't true for me. We, Fëanor, Nerdanel, and myself, we were among the first children to be born in Valinor. I swear the tree light made us wild. The 3 of us were always running around the continent. I tried to keep us out of trouble, but Naro and Nerdanel kept dragging me back into it. Turgon imagined his uncle as a child. It was a terrifying thought. Engelmoth must have been strong indeed to keep Elfling Fëanor from killing himself. Maybe the world would have been better had he not been, and young Fenrir had drowned in a sand pit. True, the king answered. I've always known my uncle to be a jealous and selfish tyrant. Still, I will not let my personal grievances against him interfere with your relationship. Go see him if you wish. No one is getting any work done today, not even Lord Drog. Tarakas was galloping as fast as he could. Maghradze is in trouble. Maghradze is in trouble. He was ashamed that the forest had spooked him. A war horse should not fear twigs. But those had been unnaturally freaky twigs. Wicked spindles of branches that cast long shadows. Shadows that looked like spiders. He tossed his mane in the wind, snorting at the thought of that dark place. And now Maghradze is trapped there. Trapped because he had thrown him. It was horrible. He was a traitor. I should burn in fire for my deeds. I should. But I ought to make it right first. Luckily, Tarakas knew just how to help. Finno! And Finno's lovely mare, the beautiful Almana. Finno and Maghradze were friends. Finno could help. And Almana too. All he had to do was gallop to Ethel Sirion. He was making good time already. The sun was just beginning to set, its golden rays washing the plains of Dalath Dirnen in an amber hue. Already Tarakas had crossed the fens of Sirion and into the wider grasslands between Amon-Rud and the Anram Mountains. He ran like there was no weariness, his hoofs thunder over the land. When, all at once, there was a strange glow ahead of him. Startled, Tarakas leapt to the side. Yet he immediately chastised himself, deciding to face this unknown spectre with courage as a warhorse of Himring ought to do. He would not let blue sparkle scare him. The enemy did not sparkle. It would be okay. Still, Tarakas eyed the dissipating sparkles warily and gave them a wide berth. As he passed the totally not spooky, totally normal sparkles, he noticed that there was an Eleth in the middle of them. Isse! Tarakas couldn't get his head around her full name, so he called her Isse. It was Finno's sister! Oh, what a glorious day! They could ride to Finno together. That way, he wouldn't scare Ma's friend too bad. It was never good to see a horse and a rider separated, but if he had Isse to help break the news, it would be better. Tarakas wondered where she had been for so long. He hadn't seen the Eleth in quite some time. Namo realized at once that directing Elven Fear back to life on another continent was way more difficult than it sounded. No wonder Eero had instructed him to release re-embodied elves outside the gates and have them walk or ride home. Sending elven spirits flying across the ocean to land in one designated location on the continent was like trying to direct a shooting star. Simply not possible. Therefore, when he had tried to send Aradhel to Gondolin, she had missed the secret city entirely and had ended up on a grass plain somewhere. Luckily, there was a giant black horse out for a nice afternoon gallop. It was a bit strange, but why not? Why couldn't a horse be out for a simple afternoon run? Wait. Namo squinted his eyes at the seeing stone he had borrowed from Mahanaksar. This horse was saddled. Namo thought, but he decided that he shouldn't look too much into any conveniences. Perhaps Eero realized that he needed a break and had sent the horse to pick up the Eleth. This, after all, was not the time to question his creator. All right, who's next? He asked, turning around to look at the group of elves who were looking at the seeing stone in horror. What? She's fine. Agnar and Angrod looked at each other. Then they glanced at Delva and Elenve. On seeing the Vanya lady and their young cousin, they immediately stepped forward as one. We will go, Angrod declared, voice faltering a bit. Namo nodded. Finarfin's sons had no reason to be afraid. All right, step right here, he directed. Then he closed his eyes and imagined Nargothrond. Yes, they would want to visit their brother. Namo sang soft words of life and traveling. Maybe this would be easier had he not given some of his strength away to that Noldo, but oh well, peace requires a price. It will be worth it to have his own home again once Melkor was defeated and the elves stopped dying. He imagined the caves of stone and massive archways of the underground realm. Yes, This would be easy. He put his arms forward to release his power and said Agnar and Angrod to their brother when the oaken doors of the throne room slammed open. Namo, my lord Manwe requests that you take this. What in air are you doing? Namo looked up to see the Herald of Manwe standing there looking disheveled, which was completely out of character for the Maya. An annoyed scowl was plastered across Eanowe's face, and his normally perfect hair was standing up in places. Were those cuts on his face? What? Then Nama looked down. Oh. The herald was holding the bound arms of someone who had a cloth potato sack slung over his head. Even with its face covered, Nama recognized the being oozing arrogance immediately. Myron. Then the Vala put two and two together and about to burst a blood vessel or two. No, absolutely not! Melgar could have that smug bastard. He would not play caretaker to every forsaken elf and Maya in air! His anger flaring in his justified rage, Nama released his built-up power and sent the sons of Finarfin hurtling through space. Myron heard the telltale sound of Eanowe's palm slapping his forehead. Oh, this was delicious. Where did you send them? Eanowe shouted, stepping forward and forcing Myron to stumble along on his side. Clearly, he had been successful in getting under the idiot's skin. Why do you care? Nama snapped. All you and King Manwe do is give me more and more work. Perhaps I'm tired of work. My lord Manwe oversees the skies. He is lord of airs and the Eldar king. Queen Varda maintains the night sky. Lady Yavanna's realm is the trees and forests. You, my lord, were supposed to watch the dead. I am watching the dead. Why are you here, servant? Are you dead? Is your prisoner dead? No? Then begone! Eanowe's grip on Myron's bicep clamped down hard enough to bruise. I will be gone, my lord, but take this foul creature. It is your king's decree. He shoved Myron forward so hard that he fell to his knees. Namo shouted, but Eanowe was gone in a rush of wings. Sauron wondered how much flying must hurt him. The heat of his hand was no natural burn. Yet, he mused, it is altogether a shame. I would have liked to have seen Mundos destroy that vile peacock. Myron was distracted from his thoughts by the ground trembling beneath his knees. A furious Nama marched over and wrenched the back of his head. Myron blinked even though the light was dim within the halls. Hello, Doom Master, he greeted sweetly, looking up at the Vala's furious eyes. Are you this emotional when you dodge the mortal dead? Nama's eyes blazed, and he looked ready to spit fire like the dragons of Angband. Myron was sure that he would be hit, but somehow Nama found restraint within him. Halion, Elentia, take him out of my sight, the Vala ordered two of his servants. Myron laughed as the hands took him and dragged him to his feet. He had a feeling that should he wish to leave, it wouldn't be that difficult to negotiate for his release. Yet, he thought then of his master learning of his failure and his now useless state. Myron shuddered in the hands that held him. As much as he loved serving Melkor, to return to him now would be a certain death. A painfully slow and terrible one. And that was if he were allowed to die at all. Maglor hated this wood. The trees were speaking. No, singing. The trees were singing to him. Their song was in the air he breathed. The rocks too seemed to echo with verse, and all around him there was a throbbing melody. It may have been beautiful had it not been so haunting and creepy. The song was prickling at his skin, the words in some language he had never learned.
Come sing with us.
The lightning bugs that crossed his path seemed to whisper as they danced above the forest floor. No, Maglor said under his breath. Was he going insane? He looked up from the ground to see that they were approaching the wide stone bridge leading to the carved halls of Menekroth. His step faltered, and he stopped, watching Maedhros and the others continue on, chattering as if it was a perfectly normal spring day. chattering as if it was a perfectly normal spring day, as if the world wasn't echoing in song and Thingol wasn't about to kill them. Something neighed at him. He turned to see the 3 horses that the Sindar had brought. "Go, elf." The white one seemed to speak into his soul. "There are apples and rest inside." Maglor felt repulsed at the thought of eating anything, but the mention of apples was the least of his concerns. "Why are the horses speaking to me?" he cried internally. "Why are the trees singing? Or have I finally lost my mind? Delco will get a kick out of this. Look, everyone, Maghradze talks to plants. Of course, Maghradze seems perfectly alright. Lucky bastard." And the hearing was only a small part of the problem. Infinitely worse was that there was something within him that yearned to answer the song of the forest. There was a power, a swirling energy that was making him sick. "Maglor," a beautiful feminine voice called. "Come up here. It is the best if you're with me when we meet the guards." Maglor didn't believe it particularly mattered if the guards killed him before or after Thingol caught sight of him in his realm, but he obeyed all the same. Luthien was radiant in her sky-blue dress, and she was smiling as he approached. She took his hand in her small one. "You're afraid," she said, large grey eyes looking into his own. Maglor huffed and pulled his hand back. "I feel ill. I also know your father, and how he will react to our presence. After all, was it not Thingol who, when Maghradze had been captured, had ridden back asking Maglor to go to become the Dark Lord's thrall as well?" Luthien placed a tender hand on Maglor's brow as if to check for a fever. "He will be just as furious with me for bringing you back. We will handle his anger together." Maglor saw Daran shift on his feet. "Relax, Cinda. You can keep your title of greatest singer and your beloved princess. Do you really think that I care to have either? No. I wanted my brothers to be safe and my parents to be happy. See, I cannot even achieve my simple dreams, much less your great ones." Maglor blinked to see that Maghradze was looking at him strangely again. "Vano, are you okay?" "I'll make it," Maglor answered, even as the melody of the forest swelled all the greater in his breaking mind. Luthien approached the towering archways at the entrance of Maghradze. 2 guards stood on either side, armed with bows and dressed in green hunting tunics. She recognized them as Golvan and Ialesh. "Princess!" Golvan called with distress in his voice. "Those are the sons of Fëanor!" he announced, as if she didn't already know who her companions were. "Maghradze has a giant Fëanorian star on his armor. She wasn't so sheltered as to miss that." Golvan drew his bow and leveled the weapon at her guests' faces. Ialesh mirrored the movement. Maghradze and Maglor stiffened at her side, but neither reached for their swords. "On your knees, kinslayers!" Ialesh ordered, although Luthien could detect more than a hint of fear in his voice. "No!" Luthien demanded. "They are guests under my protection. You will not threaten them in front of me." "Princess!" Golvan shouted aghast. "They slaughtered your uncle's people! This red-haired demon killed your cousin!" He thrust his notched arrow at Maghradze's throat. The Lord of Himring didn't flinch. He stood still as a statue, with fire simmering in his eyes. "And if I wanted him dead, I would have let Captain Maplung slay him," Luthien answered. Golvan looked behind her then to see Maplung standing there. "Captain Maplung?" he asked in surprise. "Lower your weapons," Maplung commanded, stepping forward. "Their fates will be determined by our king. The princess has the right to bring them before him." "They don't deserve it," Ialesh murmured. "I know," said Maplung. "I hate them also, yet we have a common enemy, and Luthien is your princess. Their fates are not for you to decide." Ialesh's wild green eyes went back and forth between the Noldor and Sindar. Finally he relented. "Very well, princess. Forgive me. Welcome home." He bowed curtly. "Welcome, Princess Luthien," Golvan muttered, slinging his bow back over his back. "And Captain Maplung and Lord Daran as well. His Majesty is still in the Great Hall." Luthien inclined her head. "Thank you, faithful guardsman." She then smiled brightly at the 2 brothers, motioning for them to follow. She led them through the towering archways and deeper into her realm, the golden lamps casting the walkway into a warm glow as the sun's light faded and set behind them. The pillars on either side were carved like trees of autumn, and their canopy gems sparkled and the figurines of birds hid in the emerald leaves. When they neared the entrance to the great hall of Thingol, she turned to dismiss her two companions. "Lord Dodon, Captain Mablung, I will take the Fëanorians to see my father now. Thank you for accompanying me on my journey." "Princess!" Dodon exclaimed. "We cannot—" "You will," she said, surprised at the power of her voice. She did not mean to snap at Dodon, but these two brothers were her responsibility. She did not need her friends and their prejudice interfering. Maybe the two were kinslayers, but she could not help to think that there was something more to both of them, something sweet and kind. Dodon seemed to protest, but Mablung sighed. He mumbled something that sounded a lot like "Your funeral, my lady," under his breath, but then grabbed Dodon's arm and led him away. Arjen had set the sun behind the western sea, and the lanterns of the great hall cast a warm ambiance. Melian entered from the small door behind her husband's throne to see him relaxing and talking with Celeborn and Galadriel, who had both pulled up chairs of their own. She approached and grazed her husband's arm with delicate fingers. "My love," he said, looking up at her, "I was just talking with my nephew and Galadriel about the gardens. Do you think we should add more violets near the fountain? The marble one with the carving of Nessa?" "I think violets would be lovely," she replied. Thingol smiled. Galadriel thought so too. Celeborn says he agrees, but I don't think he actually has much of an opinion. Celeborn laughed. "Flowers were never my area of expertise," he answered. "Luthien would have the greater knowledge." Thingol nodded thoughtfully. "Of course she would. Where is she? I haven't seen her all day." Melian smiled. "I had tea with some of the other ladies today. It was too dull for our daughter. She went off with Dairon." Galadriel raised a finely arched eyebrow. "She did?" Melian calmly nodded, but inwardly she winced. Already Galadriel has grown so wise. I should be proud. "Yes, I do not—" Melian was saved from having to explain further by the sudden opening of the doors at the far end of the halls. She watched as Luthien strolled down the marble floor, the gemstones of the carven pillars reflecting glimmering light on her fair skin. Behind her were the two eldest sons of Fëanor, Mablung and Dodon nowhere to be seen. "Father!" Luthien declared happily. "I know you might be upset, but—" She never finished. "Luthien!" Thingol shouted more in alarm than in anger. "What?" Galadriel was likewise on her feet. "Nelia Finwe, Makalaure, what are you two doing here?" Then Maklor fainted. End of chapter 20. Stay tuned. Also, let's hope this new mic is worth it.